Hello lovelies, in this video we're going to be going through your Edexcel IGCSE Maths Foundation Paper 1, the paper that we've written to help you revise for 2024. So after the question comes up, pause, have a go at it yourself and a bit of paper, and then play the video and we can work through the answers together.
From the numbers in the box below, write down a square number. Now it's important that we know what a square number is and also can just recognise by sight some of the key ones. So a square number is whatever we get when we get a number times by itself. So that could be like 1 times 1 gives us 1. It could be 2 times 2 gives us 4. It could be 3 times 3 equals 9. However, we should be very familiar with those numbers 1, 4, 9, and we should just recognise that they are square numbers. Now, looking at this question again and looking at the choice of numbers that we have, I can see a couple of options here for square numbers. I can see that 9 is a square number, so I could write that as an answer. I can also see 1 is also a square number, so both of those are going to be options here. Both of those would get you the mark. Next up, we're asked to write down a multiple of 4. Now, a multiple of 4 is a number that's in the 4 times tables. So we could have a go at writing a list of numbers in the 4 times tables and see if we can see any that match. So 1 times 4 is 4, 2 times 4 is 8, 3 times 4 is 12, 4 times 4 is 16, 5 times 4 is 20, and so on. Now, looking at this list of numbers here, I can see that 8 is in the list, so I'm going to write down 8. Next up, we are told to write down a prime number. So first of all, I just want to remind you of what a prime number is defined as. Now, a prime number is a number which only has 2 factors. That is 1 and itself. So that means that it can't be divided by many different numbers. Literally, you can only divide it by 1 or itself to get a whole number. Now, looking at the choice of numbers that we have in this question, 9, I know I can also divide it by 3. 8, I know I can also divide it by 2. 2, though, I can divide it by itself. I can divide it by 2. And I can divide it by 1. And that's the only 2 numbers I can divide 2 by. So for that reason, 2 is my prime number. Funnily enough, 1 isn't a prime number because it only gets divided by 1 and itself is also 1. So you don't have those 2 different numbers you can divide it by to get another whole number. So that is like the odd one out. That's like a little surprise fact. 1 is not a prime number. 15, again, you can divide it by 3 or 5. 22, you can divide it by 2. 33 by 3, 1,000 by lots of things, including 10. So there's only one prime number here, and that is 2. Here we're told that the diagram below shows a shape, and we're asked to shade 1/8 of the shape. So there's a few different ways we could do this, but the way that I'd do it is first I'd count up how many little rectangles I have here. I can see that I've got 16 of these little rectangles. So to know how many rectangles I need to shade, I need to work out what 1/8 of 16 is. So I can do this using a calculator. I can do 1/8 times by 16 and I find that the answer is 2. So if I go back now to my shape and I shade in any 2 of these rectangles, then I will get the mark. Remember, it doesn't matter which 2, just any 2 and you would get your mark. Next up, we're asked to work out the percentage of the shape that gets shaded. So the way that we do this is we write down the fraction, and this works with any question. We can take any fraction or decimal, and if we multiply it through by 100, then we find the percentage. So 1/8 times by 100 gives us 12.5%, and that there is our answer. Next up, we're asked to write 0.3 as a fraction in its simplest form. We should recognise that 0.3 is equal to 3/10, and that is something at foundation level that we just need to know. Next up, we're asked to find 85% of 120. So 85% can be written as a fraction. Percent means per 100. So 85% is 85 over 100. And to find what 85% of 120 is, we simply multiply it through by 120. So that ends up giving us 102, and that is our answer for 85% of 120. A sample of 30 customers in a pet shop were asked what their favourite pet was. 15 people preferred dogs, 10 people preferred cats, 2 people preferred rabbits, and the rest preferred birds. He were asked to complete this little table. So quite clearly in the question, we're told how many people like dogs. We see 15. We know how many people preferred cats, that was 10. And we know how many people preferred rabbits, so that's quite easy to fill in too. But we are told that the rest preferred birds. So we need to say that 30, the total number of customers, minus the 15 who preferred dogs, minus the 10 who preferred cats, and minus the 2 preferred rabbits, is equal to 3, which is the number that preferred birds. So now we want to take that information and put it into this bar chart. So we know that 15 people preferred dogs. So we need to use a ruler and a pencil to draw on a bar at 15. Next on, we need to draw 10 for the cats. Again, make sure that in the exam you use a pencil and a ruler. A rabbit we know is 2, so we're going to do a little block at 2. And then for birds it is 3. So we need to draw on a block at 3, which is going to have a height halfway between the 2 and the 4. Again, do make sure that when you're in the exam, you use a pencil and a ruler. Now we're asked to write down which favourite pet is the mode. So let's have a look again at this table so that we can work this out. So I think we should remind ourselves of what the mode actually is. So the mode is the most common. So if we look at our table, we're looking for the animal that has the highest frequency. So clearly here, out of all of these numbers, 15 is the biggest. So that means that the mode or favourite pet is the dog. Now we're asked to work out the probability that a person in the pet shop's favourite pet was a cat. And we're asked to give your answer as a fraction in its simplest form. Well, in total here, remember that we asked 30 different people. That was given earlier in the question, but we could also just add up these votes. We can see here that 10 people voted for cats. So that's 10 out of 30. We can simplify that fraction either by looking at it and cancelling out the zeros, or by putting it into our calculator, and we can see that 1/3 is the fraction in its simplest form. The ages of 3 siblings are in the ratio 2 to 3 to 4. If the eldest sibling is 12 years old, find the sum of the siblings' ages. So to do this, let's write out this ratio nice and big. So we've got a 2 to 3 to 4 ratio, and we're told that the eldest sibling is 12 years old. Now that means that the 4 of this ratio, the biggest number, is representing that eldest sibling, 12. So to find the sum of the siblings' ages, we need to know how many parts are there in total of this ratio. So here I can see that I have got the 2 plus the 3 plus the 4 parts. Now if I add those all together, I find that I have 9 parts to this ratio. So that's the aim of the game here. To find the sum of the siblings' ages, I need to find out what 9 parts of the ratio is. Well, given the earlier info, I know that 4 parts of this ratio is equal to 12 years. So if I go down to 1 and work out what 1 part of the ratio, I can do this by simply dividing both sides by 4. 12 divided by 4 gives me 3 years. And that means I know that 1 part of this ratio is equal to 3 years. So as soon as I know what 1 part is, I can go up to 9 parts. So 9 parts of this ratio is going to be equal to that 3 times by 9. Because if I know 1 part is 3 years, 9 parts will be equal to 3 times that. So multiplying both sides by 9 here, I find that 9 parts is equal to 27. And that there is the sum of the siblings' ages, so that there's our answer. Okay, so the next part of the question asks us to work out the range of the siblings' ages. So the range is going to be equal to the biggest number minus the smallest number. Well, we already know what age the eldest sibling is. We were told that that is 12. So we need to work out what the youngest sibling is. So looking at the ratio, the youngest sibling will correspond to the 2 parts of this ratio. So if I know that 4 parts is 12, then 2 parts is going to be half of that, because 2 is half of 4. So I can say then 2 parts of the ratio will be equal to 6 years. So now we know the biggest and the smallest in this question, we can work out the range. So the range is going to be equal to 12 minus 6, and that just gives us 6. So the range of ages is equal to 6 years. Here we're asked to simplify the following, and we've got 5x plus 7x minus 2x. So all of these are like terms, so we just add them up. Let's start by doing 5x plus 7x. Now that gives us 12x. If we now try and subtract the 2x, then that leaves us with 10x, and that's our answer to A. For question B now, we've got mixed terms. So first let's look at the A's. Here we have 2A minus A, and that just leaves us with 1A. Then let's look at the B's. Here instead we've got 2B plus B. So 2B plus B gives us 3B. So in total then, that leaves us with A plus 3B. And that is what we need to do to get our marks. So the diagram here shows the point X. We're asked to write down the coordinates of point X. Now, the way that we do this is we start at this middle point here, which is 0, 0, and we need to see how much do we need to go left or right in the x-axis to get to x. And I can see here that to start off with, I need to go -1 in the x direction, and then I need to think how much up or down do I need to go, so in the y-axis. And I can see that I would need to go up by 1. So that means that our coordinate is going to be -1 because we've moved -1 in the x direction, and then +1 because we've moved up by 1 in the y direction. And remember, that's what these 2 points represent. The first number in a set of coordinates represents the x coordinate, and the second value represents your y coordinate. So now we need to put this into practice again. We're told on the grid to mark the point 3, 2 with a cross and to label it point Y. So we said before, didn't we, that the first number here represents the x-axis. So starting at that middle point again, we need to go across by 1, 2, 3 to get to 3. And then we need to go up by 2 to get to 2. So that leaves us with the point Y. So there we go. So point Y is just there at the coordinate 3, 2. So now we're asked to write down the coordinates of a point that would create an isosceles triangle with x and y. So the first thing we should do here is just remind ourselves of what an isosceles triangle is. So it's a triangle that has 2 sides of equal length. Now, with this particular question, there's actually quite a few different options that we could use to get this isosceles triangle. So one option we could get would be by placing a little x here, because I hope you can see this length is going to be the same as this length. Now that is one very good viable option for a point that we can put on that would create an isosceles triangle. Let me show you another one as well though, okay? So let's have a go at instead placing it over here. So again, I can see that the length going from X to Y is going to be exactly the same as this length here, going from X to this point. Now that would give us another option for a point that would provide us with an isosceles triangle. So like I say, there's a few other options we could give, but so long as we meet those key conditions of having two sides of equal length, then we will get our mark. A person is shopping with a budget of £15. We're told that they've bought 3 packs of bananas for £1.29 each, 1 loaf of bread for £1.89, 2 pizzas for £2.99 each, and 2 bottles of orange juice for £1.20 each. And we're asked to calculate how much change we will receive from our original £15 budget. So let's have a look at this then. Really what this wants us to do is to tally up the total cost of our shopping to start. So we need to do 3 times £1.29 plus just 1 of these £1.89 loaves of bread, plus 2 times £2.99 and 2 times £1.20. Now this is really a bit of calculator work, okay? We want to put this into the calculator and find that we have spent a total of £14.14. Now we had a budget of £15 and we need to see how much money we have left over. So finally, now that we've got that total, we're going to do £15 minus £14.14, which leaves us with £0.86. And that's our answer. In this question, we're given this diagram and we're asked to find angle X. So we need to find this angle here. Now, as is often the case with these angle type questions, there's a few different methods that we could use to work this out. So the method I'm going to use today is I am going to use the fact that we have some parallel lines. And I can see here that I have what looks a bit like a Z or a Z angle. Now we need to be careful here though, because at GCSE they do not want you using phrases like Z angles. We need to use the proper technical name for it. So a Z angle like this is actually called an alternate angle. And the way that I always prompt myself in my head with that is I sort of think, oh, A to Z, which I know is literally just nonsense. But A to Z gives us the Z angles. So alternate angle is that Z angle. And using this rule, just to remind you what it looks like, we have a pair of parallel lines and a line crosses through them like we have in this example. This angle here is exactly the same as this angle here. So you can probably see how we can use this here. We can say that this angle is equal to 123 degrees. So now that we know that that angle is 123 degrees, we can work out what that angle X is, simply by using the fact that the angles on a straight line add up to make 180 degrees. So that means that we can say that 180 minus 123 gives us our angle X, and that's going to give us 57 degrees. So that there is our answer. Here we're told that a student buys 3 notebooks and 2 folders for £12.45. Another student buys 4 notebooks and 1 folder for £15.50. Here we're asked to work out the cost of 1 notebook. So what I would decide here is I'm going to represent the notebooks with an N and I'm going to represent the folders with an F. And I'm going to use that notation to write a couple of formulas down. So starting with that first sentence, we've got 3 notebooks plus 2 folders. I'm going to call that 3N plus 2F and I'm going to put that equal to 12.45. So now I'm going to do exactly the same with the second sentence. So we know that the student buys 4 notebooks and 1 folder for £15.50. So I've got 4N plus F equals 15.50. Now that I have this, I have a pair of simultaneous equations, and there's a few ways that we can solve these. In this case, I'm going to rearrange that second equation to get the f as the subject, but there's a lot of different ways you could do this. So long as you get the same answer at the end, then we're golden. So we know now that f is equal to 15.50 minus 4n. If we substitute that in place of the f in the first equation, then we can multiply out the brackets and simplify to find n. So this is what we get, 3n plus 2 brackets 15.50 minus 4n close brackets equals 12.45. So if we multiply out these brackets first, we've got 3n plus, and then we're going to do 2 times 15.50, which gives us 31. Then we do 2 times minus 4n, which gives us minus 8n, and then we just put equals to that £12.45. Now let's group together our n's. So here we have 3n minus 8n. Now this gives us minus 5n. So I'm going to write minus 5n plus 31 equals £12.45. Now I want to move that plus 31. I want to shift it onto the other side so it's with the other numbers that don't have n. And the way I'm going to do that is by subtracting that 31, doing the opposite of the plus 31 that's already there. So here I've got minus 5n equals 12.45 minus 31. Now that I can just put into the calculator, and I find that minus 5n will be equal to minus 18.55. So now on that last step, we just need to get that n on its own. At the minute it's multiplied by minus 5. So if we do the opposite of timesing it by minus 5 and divide both sides by that minus 5, we'll get the n all on its own. And here I get that n is equal to £3.71. And so that is the cost of one notebook. A car travelled a distance of 125 kilometres at an average speed of 50 kilometres per hour. If the car left on its journey at 9:15, work out the time it arrived at its destination. So here we need to remind ourselves of the equation that connects speed, distance and time. So we should know that speed is equal to distance over time. Now in this case, let's look at what information we know. So we know that the distance travelled is 125 kilometres, and we know that the speed is 50 kilometres per hour. What we need to find out now though is the time. And so to work out the time here, we're going to have to rearrange this equation. Now we can either do this using algebra, or if you're not confident on that, you can use the classic triangle. So in this triangle, speed and time are on the bottom of it and distance is on the top, and we can learn it like this if it will help you. So we need to find the time. So what we do is we sort of cover up the time, and you see you've got distance over speed. So we can write the equation then as time equals distance over speed, divided by speed. Now if we substitute in those numbers that we know, we'll get 125 divided by 50. And if we stick that into our calculator, we find that we have 2.5 hours that it's taken us. Now that's not quite it yet, because we were told that the car left on its journey at 9:15, and we were asked to work out the time that it arrived at its destination. So we need to ask ourselves, well, what's the time 2.5 hours after 9:15? And that time is 11:45. And that there is our arrival time, and that's our answer. So here we're given some information, and we're asked to complete the Venn diagram using that information. So we can see from the information given that we have the numbers from 1 to 10 in our set, and A is going to be prime numbers and B is the odd numbers out of this particular set of numbers. So let's ask ourselves, what are the prime numbers between 1 and 10? So that's going to be 2, 3, 5 and 7. At the same time, if we ask ourselves, what are the odd numbers between 1 and 10? Well, that's going to be 1, 3, 5, 7 and 9. Now let's go back to the Venn diagram now that we've worked that out. This region in the middle is the set of numbers that are in both A and B, so who are both prime numbers and odd numbers. So here, by comparing what we've written down, I can see that 3, 5 and 7 need to go into this intersection. I can see that things that are in A but not in that intersection is just 2, and the things that go in B but not in the intersection are 1 and 9. So let's cross these numbers off of our list. By doing this, we can see that there's a few numbers that were in neither A nor B. We've got 4, we've got 6, we've got 8 and we've got 10. So they exist in the box but not in A and B. So now we're asked to find the numbers in A union B. Now what that means is in all of A and B. So we're not just looking at the intersection, we're looking at anything that is within A and B. And we want how many things are there in A and B, because they're just asking for that number. So if we just list out what numbers exist there, we can see we've got 2, we've got 3, 5, 7, 1 and 9. All of those exist within A and B. Now in total that is 6 different numbers, and so the number in A union B is going to be 6. Now we're asked to find the probability of A intersection B. Now that is that middle region where A and B intersect each other. And I can see that I've got 3 numbers in that region, and in total I had 10 numbers. So the probability of getting something in that region is going to be 3 out of 10, and that is the probability of A intersection B. So the first part of this question asks us to simplify m to the power of 0, and we should know that anything to the power of 0 is 1, so that's the answer there. Next up, we're asked to expand 3x brackets x plus 4, close brackets. So what we need to do is to multiply out the brackets. So that 3x needs to get times with everything inside the brackets. First off, let's do 3x times by x. That gives us 3x squared. Now if we do 3x times by 4, we get 12x. So we've got 3x squared plus 12x. So now we've got a simplified question. And to answer this question, let me remind you of a couple of really important rules that you do need to know. So we should know that whenever we have something to the power of something and times it by another power, we add those powers. So x to the m times x to the n is x to the m plus n. Now if instead we have a division and we have x to the m divided by x to the n, we subtract those powers instead. Now we're going to put both of these into practice in this question. Here we've got a cubed times a to the 7 divided by a squared. So if we look at this top part, a cubed times a to the 7, we can use the addition rule, and we can call this a to the power of 3 plus 7. Now we can simplify that and call it a to the power of 10, and it's divided by a squared. Now we've simplified that, we can use the subtraction rule. We can say that this is equal to a to the power of 10 minus 2, which is a to the power of 8. And that is our answer. So if you don't know those rules, please do make a note and get memorising them. So now we're told that given that a equals minus 4 and b equals 5, find c, given that c equals 3a squared minus 2b. So what we need to do here is to replace the a with minus 4 and replace the b with 5. Now really important here, make sure that you put brackets around any negative numbers, especially when we're squaring them, because otherwise your calculator will read it wrong and you'll make a mistake. So once we've substituted those numbers in, we can put them into the calculator. So if we start with 3 times minus 4 squared, we get 48. And 2 times 5 is 10, so therefore c will equal 48 minus 10, which gives us 38, and there's our answer to D. So here we have a question where they're going to test us on how we use a calculator. This is all about how we type our numbers into the calculator. We're going to have to write down all the values on our calculator display. Now, the main tip that I would give is this bit here, which is like a fraction. I would make sure that I use the fraction button on the calculator. It looks a little bit like this, and you'll find it on the top left-hand side of the buttons. Now, by using this whenever there's a fraction, we don't need to worry so much about brackets. And then when we type this all in, we're going to get minus 1.9716979902. And have a play around with it and make sure that you do get that number. And a little extra note here, make sure that when you're practicing these papers, you're not using your phone calculator. Make sure that you use the real calculator that you'll be using in the exams. It's so important that you know how to use it to get the right answer. And also, you'll be getting better at it every time you practice it. Whereas your phone calculator has such limited capabilities, you're much more likely to make mistakes along the way. So now round your answer to part A to 3 significant figures. And here I've underlined those 3 significant figures. You can see the number after the 7 is just 1, so we're not going to round up or anything. Our answer would simply be minus 1.97, and that is our answer. Here we're told that a fair dice is rolled 900 times. We're asked to find an estimate for the number of times the dice landed on 6. So first off, let's work out the probability of the dice landing on a 6. We should be very familiar with the fact that a dice has 6 faces, so the probability of it being a 6 would just be 1 out of 6. Now if we're rolling it 900 times, we can estimate the number of times it falls on a 6 by multiplying that 900 by the 1/6. So that gives us an answer equal to 150. So that means that we estimate the number of times the dice lands on a 6 to be 150 times. Here we're told that a circle has an area of 144 pi. And we're asked to work out the circumference of the circle in terms of pi. So to work this out, let's first just write down the area of a circle. So we should know that's pi r squared. This question also asks us about the circumference of a circle. So let's write down that equation too, so we've got all the information where we need it. So the circumference is equal to 2 pi r, so 2 times pi times the radius. So now we have enough information to piece together to work this out. We're told that the area of the circle is 144 pi, so we know that that is equal to pi r squared. If we rearrange this equation now to work out what r is, first off we can divide through by the pi to get r squared equals 144 pi divided by pi, which just simplifies to 144. And then if we square root 144, we will get the radius. We find that the radius is just equal to 12. So now we know the radius, we've done most of the hard work in this question. We just need to plug that number into this equation for the circumference. So that's going to be 2 times pi times by 12, and that gives us 24 pi. Remember, this question asks us to give the answer in terms of pi, so we don't even really need to worry about using the calculator for this. We can just keep the pi on the end. If you do use the calculator, make sure that it gives you an answer in terms of pi. If it doesn't, then put it down and just do it using your head. On the grid below, draw the graph of y equals 2 minus 1/2 x for all values of x from -2 to 2. So the way I like to do this is I like to draw up my own little grid if they haven't given us one already. I'm going to have the x and the y values, and we're told that we want to use all values of x from -2 to 2. So I'm going to write down x is -2, -1, 0, 1 and 2. Now I know that y equals 2 minus 1/2 x. So if I want to work out what the corresponding y coordinates are, I can substitute each of those values of x into this formula to work out what they are. So let's give this a go using the first value. Let's have a go using x equals -2. So what I'm going to do is replace this value of x in the formula with -2. So let's see what this looks like. We're going to end up having y equals 2 minus a half times by -2. Now, if I work out what that gives me, I find that y is equal to 3 when x equals -2. So I'll put that into my little grid here. Now I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the other values. So let's now have a go when x equals -1. In this case, we have y equals 2 minus a half times -1, and that ends up giving us y equals 2.5. So we'll repeat it now with x equals 0. Here we have y equals 2 minus a half times 0. Now that just leaves us with 2 this time. So we're making our way through this nice and easily. Next up, let's do x equals 1. So here, substituting in place of the x for 1, we've got y equals 2 minus a half times 1, and that gives us 1.5. So last bit now, we've got x equals 2. So here we've got y equals 2 minus a half times by 2. And that leaves us with y is equal to 1. So now we've got a set of coordinates that we can go to our grid and plot. So first off, I'm going to plot -2, 3. So I'm going to go along the x-axis by -2 and then up by 3 and plot that point. Next up, I'm going to go along the x-axis by -1 and then I'm going to go up by 2.5. Now I'm just going to be at 0 for x and then I'm going to go up to 2. So now we're nearly done. I'm going to go across the x-axis by 1 and then I'll go up by 1.5. And finally, 2, 1 is the last point we need. So I'm going to go along the x-axis by 2 and then up by 1. And quite clearly here you can see a pattern forming. How we want to finish this off is with a nice straight line that you're going to draw on using a pencil and a ruler that's going to go through all of those points, which you should be drawing with a pencil as well. But there you are, that is our graph, all done. Here we're asked to show that 4 and 4/5 divided by 1 and 1/3 is equal to 3 and 3/5. Now this is to show that because obviously this is a calculator paper, but they want to see your method. So the first thing, let's change these fractions into top-heavy fractions. We do this by doing the 4 times the denominator and then plus that 4 of the numerator. So here we've got 4 times 5 and then we add on that 4 and it's all over 5, which was that denominator. That gives us 24 over 5. So we can rewrite 4 and 4/5 as 24 over 5. Next up we have 1 and 1/3. Again, if we take the whole number, times it by the denominator, and then add on the numerator, we will find what we need for our top-heavy fraction. And then we'll just divide it by that 3 that is already on the denominator. That doesn't change. And that gives us 4/3 for this fraction. So now we've got them both as top-heavy fractions, let's go back to what they're asking for. Here it's now looking like 24 over 5 divided by 4 over 3. Now this is a division, so I like to use the KFC rule, which states that we're going to keep it, flip it, and change it. Now, what this means is our first fraction in our division, we just keep it as it is, we're not going to change it. The second fraction, we are going to flip it upside down, and then we're going to change the sign from a division to a times. So now this is going to look like 24 over 5 times by 3 over 4, and that's using our KFC rule. So now we need to remember that when we multiply fractions, all we need to do is multiply the tops and multiply the bottoms, simplify if we can, and we're away. So 24 times by 3 gives us 72, and 5 times 4 gives us 20. Now this can simplify down a bit. We can see that both the bottom and the top are even numbers, so we can halve a few times until we end up getting what we need. This ends up giving me 18 over 5. This is even a point where you could now put this into the calculator and see how it simplifies. So 18 over 5 though, we should know that that is 3 and 3/5. We need to make that final link. The reason why that is the same is because in the number 18, you can get 5 3 whole times. So we have 3 as our whole number, and then we'll have a remainder of 3 because 18 minus those 3 5s gives us 3. So that's why we have 3 and 3/5, and we have shown what we needed to. Here we're asked to factorise x squared plus 7x plus 10. Now there's nothing that each of these have in common, so that means this is going to factorise to make a double bracket. Now when it's a double bracket question, you want to take the number which doesn't have any x's, and we want to find a pair of numbers that are going to multiply together to make that number, while at the same time adding together to make the coefficient of x, so in this case positive 7. So we need to find two numbers here that are going to multiply together to give us 10 and add together to give us 7. So I like to knock up like a little easy table here just in case it takes me a while. So my first instinct here is 2 times 5 will give me 10. Now if I add those together, I get 7. Well, I don't have to do any more. I've already hit the jackpot, which was quite lucky. It's not always the case. But if you don't get it first time, just keep writing different combos until you get the right one. So now, like I said, this is a double brackets question because there's nothing that goes into x squared, 7x and 10. So we're going to write our double brackets. We're going to write x plus 2 because we found 2 as one of our numbers, and then x plus 5, again because that's our other number that we found. And that is it, factorised. So now we're asked to solve x squared plus 7x plus 10 equals 0. So let's take what we just got and put it equal to 0. Now, to make this equal 0, either the x plus 2 must be equal to 0 or the x plus 5 must be equal to 0. So what we can do is take each of those brackets and just equate them to 0. So we could say x plus 2 equals 0 and then rearrange that to find that x must equal minus 2. Then we can do the same with the other bracket. X plus 5 equals 0, which means that x must equal minus 5. And there we have solved this equation with the solutions x equals minus 2 and x equals minus 5. So the salaries of 80 employees of a company are given in the table below. So we've got this nice little summary table and we're asked to write down the modal class. So what we need to know here is that the modal class is the most common interval. So what we need to do is to go and have a look at this table and find which one has the highest frequency. So I can see that the salary range between £20,000 and £30,000 is the most frequent and therefore the most common. So that is the modal class. And make sure that you write that whole interval. We don't just write 25 or anything, that isn't what they want. They want that interval of salaries. Now we're asked to work out an estimate for the mean salary. So it's a 4-marker this, it's going to be a bit trickier, but there's a really nice straightforward method to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy down this table here just so I can scribble all over it, okay? Okay, so to work out an estimate for the mean salary, we need to take the midpoint of the salaries, and then once we've worked out the midpoint, we need to work out what the midpoint times the frequency is. Now, all this is going to be part of our method, so if we fill it all in, all will be good. So the midpoint between 0 and 10,000 is just 5,000, so I'm going to write that in here. The midpoint between 10,000 and 20,000 is 15,000, so I'm going to write that. Midpoint between 20 and 30,000 is 25, 30 and 40,000 is 35,000, and the midpoint between 40,000 and 50,000 is 45,000. So now we're going to times the frequency by the midpoint. So 13 times by 5,000 gives me 65,000. 14 times 15,000 gives me 210,000. Now 25 times 25,000 ends up giving me 625,000. 17 times 35,000 ends up giving me 595,000. And finally, we've got 11 times 45,000 gives us 495,000. So let's remind ourselves of how we work out the mean. So mean is always going to be the sum of values. Now in these types of questions with class intervals, that means the sum of the midpoint times the frequencies. And then we divide it by the number that there are. Now in this case, we're told that we have 80 employers. That in this case is going to be what n is. So let's work out the sum of all those midpoint times frequencies. So we're just going to add up the 65,000, the 210,000, all of those, we're going to add those up together, and we end up getting 1,990,000. And we're going to divide that through by 80, which is n. That gives us now a mean salary of 24,875. And you know, if you look at the salaries that are in the table, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Like that is a number that falls in that range. It's actually in that modal class as well, which you'll often find. So let's have a look at the next part. An employee was randomly selected and asked what their salary is. Give the probability that their salary is less than or equal to £30,000. Give your answer as a fraction in its simplest form. So let's remind ourselves of that table, here it is, and let's think, less than or equal to £30,000 is going to be all of these three salary ranges. How many people are there in total with those salaries? So we've got 13 plus 14 plus 25 different people. Now, adding those up together, we end up finding that we have 52 people with salaries in that range. Now, don't forget we had 80 people in total. Of course, we can remember it from the earlier part, or we could just add up all those frequencies. Doesn't matter if we forgot that they already said it. So the probability is going to be 52 out of 80, which will simplify down to give us 13 over 20. Of course, we can work that out ourselves, but as we always have the calculator in these papers, you can always just type in 52 over 80 on the calculator, and it will normally give you the most simplified version of the fraction. A person's wage is divided in a ratio of 5 to 3 to 2 between bills, spending money and savings. 60% of the amount spent on bills is rent. Now let's write out this ratio, 5 to 3 to 2. We know that the 5 part of this refers to the bills. And we're told here that 60% of the amount spent on bills is actually rent. Now, we're given the extra bit of information on the next line, that the rent bill is £1,200 per month. That must mean then that the rent is equal to 1,200, which is equal to 60% of the bills. So let's make this little equality here. 1,200 equals 60% of the bills. So if we know that, then we can work out what 1% is. We can go down to 1 by dividing by 60. Now we'll do the same on the other side too. 1,200 divided by 60, which gives us £20. So we know that 1% of the bills is equal to £20. So now that we know what 1% is, we can easily go up to 100% and find the full amount that those bills are equal to. So if we times both sides by 100 to do that, we find that the bills comes to a total of £2,000. So now we know that the total amount of the bills come to £2,000. Let's include this in our labelling, okay? So I'm just going to add on here that that 5 part of the ratio is equivalent to £2,000. Now that I know that, I'm just going to write that as an equality. I'm going to say that £2,000 is equal to 5 parts of this ratio. And it's really important to write everything down nice and clearly like that so that we don't get lost along the way. So now that we know that 5 parts of the ratio is 2000, we can easily go down to work out what one part of the ratio is. And we can do that just by dividing both sides through by 5. So now I'm dividing both sides by 5, and I end up finding that one part of this ratio is equal to £400. So now going back to the question, when it says that the ratio 5 to 3 to 2 is between bills, spending money and savings. That means that the savings part of this ratio is represented by the number 2. So ultimately in this question, where we're asked to work out the amount of money saved each month, we need 2 parts of the ratio, which is 2 times 400, which gives us £800. And that there is our answer. A person buys a new car for £65,000. They're told that it's going to depreciate in value by 7.6% each year. And we're asked here to calculate the value of the car after 5 years, giving our answer to the nearest pound. So here we need to remember it's depreciating in value. So if we consider the original value to be 100% and take away that 7.6%, we're left with 92.4%. Now that's really helpful because we can change that percentage into a multiplier. And any of these compound interest or depreciation questions are made so much easier if you have this multiplier. Simply convert that percentage to a decimal, 0.924, and you do that by dividing by 100. So this is how we're going to do it. We're going to take the amount that the car cost, 65,000, and times it by our multiplier to the power of the number of years. Now this method works for any of these questions. Now that we've got this formula, all we need to do is to put it into the calculator. So when I do this, I get to the nearest pound, as the question wants, £43,780. And see how simple that actually was. So let's just go back and think about it again. So we always start with 100%, that's our original value. And if we're depreciating the value, we subtract the percentage. And if it's going up, like compound interest, then we add the percentage. We then find what that percentage is. In this case, it was 92.4%. And take whatever you have and divide it by 100 to get your multiplier. Then finally, we have our original value. That could be how much money you have or how much something cost. And then you times it by our multiplier to the power of the number of years. So in this case, that was 5. It could be something different to years, but probably it's going to be something like that. So it's the power of the number of years in this case. And that's how we do it. And then it's just calculator work. So I hope that's clear and you feel ready to have a go at another question like that in future. A solid bar is in the shape of a triangular prism. The bar has a mass of 1,200 grams. And we're asked to calculate the density of the bar to 2 significant figures. Now let's remind ourselves of the equation for density. Density is equal to mass divided by volume. Now in this particular question, we know the mass. We're told that it's 1,200 grams, and that's in the units we want because we need density in grams per meters cubed. But we don't yet know the volume. Now the volume of a prism like this one can be worked out by using the equation that states volume is cross-sectional area times by the length. So that's what we're going to have to do to work out the volume of this. We're going to have to first work out that cross-sectional area and then times it through its length. Now looking at the diagram, I can see the cross-sectional area as that of a triangle. So I'm going to do half the base times the height. That ends up giving us 1/2 times by 0.2 times by 0.4. And putting that into the calculator, I find that that gives me an area of 0.04 metres squared. So now I can use that to work out the volume. I know that the cross-sectional area now of that equation is 0.04. So I can say that the volume is equal to 0.04 times by the length of this prism, which is 0.9 metres. So I'm going to pop that into my equation too. So volume is 0.04 times 0.9. Now if I pop that into the calculator, I find that the volume is equal to 0.036 metres cubed. Now I do have all the information that I need to be able to calculate the density. Density is the mass of 1,200 divided by the volume 0.036. So popping that into the calculator, I find that density is equal to 33,333.333 recurring. However, this question, it doesn't just want that as the answer. Always go back, check the question at the end. You can see that they want it to two significant figures. Not two decimal places, two significant figures. So that in this case will be 33,000 grams per metres cubed. Here we're told that a gardener wants to place a border around a region of a garden. The dimensions of the region are shown below. So here we can see we've got this 3.6 by 7.5 triangle. However, we don't know the length of the hypotenuse of it. We're told that each roll of border is 5 metres long, and we're asked to work out the least number of rolls of border that the gardener will need. So this means we need to work out the perimeter of this triangle. Now to do that, we need to work out this hypotenuse length. Let's call it x. Now this is a right-angled triangle, so we can work out its length by using Pythagoras' theorem. Pythagoras' theorem states that the length of the hypotenuse squared is equal to the sum of the square of the other two sides. So here we have x squared equals 3.6 squared plus 7.5 squared, which gives us x squared equals 69.21. Now to get x on its own, we need to square root that, which leaves us with 8.319. Now we have enough information to work out the perimeter of this triangle. So let's do that. Let's get this perimeter. It's going to be equal to 3.6 plus 7.5 plus 8.319. And that ends up giving us a total for the perimeter of 19.419. So let's go back to the question now. We're told that each roll of border is 5 metres long. So we need to work out, well, how many of these 5 metre long packs of border do we need? So if we take the 19.419 and divide it by 5, we will see that we get 3.8838. Now that's how many rolls of border we need. We can't get 0.8 whatever of a border though. So we're going to round up. We're going to see that we need 4 rolls of border, and that is the least number of rolls of border that the gardener will need. The dimensions of a rectangle are given below. We're asked to use the diagram to write down two equations in terms of x and y. So what this question's really testing us on here is the knowledge that opposite sides of a rectangle have the same length. So for that reason, we can really easily construct these equations. We can say that the length 2x plus 3y is actually equal to 8. And the same with the other two sides as well. We can say that 2y is equal to 5 minus x. And by doing that, very simply, we have our two equations in terms of x and y. So next up, we're asked to find x and y. Now, what this has become now is it is a question where we need to solve a set of simultaneous equations. And of course, there's many different ways to solve simultaneous equations. I'm going to show you one way here, but if you use a different method, that's absolutely fine. So in this case, because one of these equations, the second of these equations, looks quite easy to rearrange, I feel like I could get x as the subject to that one really quite easily. So for that reason, I'm going to choose this method to work it out. I'm going to rearrange it to get x on its own, and that will end up giving me 5 minus 2y. Now I know that x is equal to 5 minus 2y, I'm going to substitute x in place of the x in the first equation with the 5 minus 2y. So that gives us 2 times by 5 minus 2y, plus 3y equals 8. So if I simplify this by multiplying out the brackets, 2 times 5 gives us 10, and 2 times minus 2y gives us 4y. So plus 3y is equal to 8. Now, collecting like terms here, I know that minus 4y plus 3y gives us minus y. So here we can say that 10y minus y is equal to 8. Well, now that I've got this, I can see either by rearranging or observation, I can see that y will equal 2. Now, as soon as I know that y equals 2, I can substitute that back into our earlier equation. Remember, we said over here that x was equal to 5 minus 2y. So here I can say that x equals 5 minus 2y, y is equal to 2 now, so that's 5 minus 2 times 2, and that just gives us x is equal to 1. So now I have found both the x and the y coordinates, and I have answered part B. Here we're asked to use our answers from part B to work out the perimeter of the rectangle. Now our answers from part B was, of course, our x equals 1 and our y equals 2. So I've added in the little diagram here just so that we can look back over it. Remember that the perimeter of a rectangle or any shape is just the sum of all of its sides. So that means we want to do the 2y, and then we want to add the 8, and then we want to add the 5 minus x, and then we want to add the 2x plus 3y. We can do it that way, but I can also do it in a simpler way. 2y is going to be 2 times 2, as of course y is 2. That gives us 4 for that side. Because it's a rectangle, we know that that bottom side is also 4. The right-hand side is 8, and so the left-hand side is 8. So for that reason, we can say that the perimeter is 4 plus 8 plus 4 plus 8, and then we end up finding that final perimeter of 24. And that there is our answer. So the diagram below shows 3 regular pentagons, and we're asked to find x. So when working this out, the fact that they're regular pentagons is really important because it tells us that every angle in the pentagon is identical. Here is a little method that we can use to work out the interior angles in a pentagon. If you take one point and see how many triangles you can draw, I can see that I can make 3 triangles. I know that each triangle has an angle of 180. So that means 3 times that 180 gives us 540. Now that's the sum of all of the interior angles. So if I take that 540 and I divide it by 5 because there's 5 angles in there, I can see each interior angle in a pentagon equals 108 degrees. So see here I can label our diagram, and actually this is becoming quite clear what we need to do next. We know that the angle around a point is 360. So if from that 360 we take away each of those 3 108s, we should be left with just what x is. So here we've got 360 minus 324 gives us what x is, and that gives us 36 degrees. So in this question, the angle x is 36. Find the gradient of the straight line that passes through the points 9, 8 and 0, 5. So this is an equation of a straight line question. So the very first thing we need to do is to write down our equation of a straight line. And this is so important that we learn this, okay? So get this on a flashcard if you don't know it. So this is y equals mx plus c. Now m is the gradient of a line and c is the y-intercept. Now this is the y-coordinate when x is equal to 0. It's where that line's going to cross the y-axis. So now that we've got this equation of a straight line all laid out, we can get to work on working out what the equation of this particular line is. So we've got the coordinates of 2 points. With this we can work out what the gradient of the line is. Let's remind ourselves of what the equation of a gradient is. Gradient is equal to the change in the y-coordinates divided by the change in the x coordinates. Now you might have learnt that as rise over run. All of them work out the same, okay? Let's look at the y coordinates that we have here. So we've got 8 and 5. So the change in the y coordinates will be 8 minus 5. Now let's next look at the x coordinates. We've got 9 and 0. So the change in the x coordinates will be 9 minus 0. This ends up giving us 3 over 9, which will simplify to be 1 over 3. So we've got our gradient now. Brilliant. We know what m is going to be in this equation of a straight line. Now we just need to know what the y-intercept is. Well, in this particular question, they kind of helped us out because one of the coordinates is 0, 5 that they've given us. Now that 5 is the y-coordinate when x is equal to 0. So 5 is the y-intercept. We don't need to do any other work to get it. They've given it to us. So I'll make a little note here then that I know that c is equal to 5. And finally, all that I need to do now is just to put this into the equation y equals mx plus c. So y is equal to 1/3 x plus 5. And that is it. A massive well done for getting through that.
Well done for making it to the end of this paper, lovelies. I'm really, really proud of all of your hard work.